Fundamentally, tuning is part of training. This is all part of the larger process of making the solution in the first place. And so, training data that is assigned for the purpose of making the solution is supposed to be looked at. You are encouraged to do as much analytics on that dataset as possible to inspire you to direct your efforts. Which ingredients should you use? Which algorithms seem to be working better, and so forth. Validation, on the other hand, is blind. That is the whole point of validation. You are not supposed to look in your validation data. You're not supposed to learn about it. It is not validation if you already know what's in there and you have designed your solution to game your validation data. And this is supposed to be a check on fresh data. How do we do on data where we don't know anything about it? And so the way that you make sure that validation stays validation is that you only look at the final performance metric. So in fact, ideally in your infrastructure, you wouldn't even allow anyone to look inside it. You hit the validation button, all it outputs is the final performance metric, nothing else. But of course, engineers, you know that if you have just fallen in love with your model and you take it to validation and it fails horribly, every bone in your body is screaming what? Debug! Find out why! What went wrong? No, that's what your debugging dataset is for. Because the problem is, if you debug in the validation data, you are eroding and ripping off the seatbelt you have against overfitting. Consider, when you look at those validation instances, you're doing it so that you can adjust your strategy. In other words, you are training on them. You wouldn't be looking unless you intended to learn from what's there and change the nature of your solution based on what's there. So, all right, if we are going to do this fairly, we should take any instance that we looked at and we should move it to the training dataset because we have trained on it. So, we've made the validation dataset a little smaller. If we were debugging at random, the only effect is that our validation dataset got smaller, and that might not be a big deal. But come now, engineers, who here debugs at random? What do? You don't debug at random. You go to the most heinous failures, and you examine them. And you adjust your solution to beat the hardest instances. Well, all right, what are we going to do with those instances? If you take them out and put them into training, your validation dataset is easy to beat. You've just taken the hardest examples out. If we leave them in, you already know what they are, and you're going to go and adjust your solution so it wins against them. So when you check performance and you find out that you have good performance, you have exactly fitted it to those few data points. That's overfitting right there. So there is no way to win here. If you want a validation data set, and you want to do validation, you have to only look at that final performance metric. And of course, I really endorse your desire to debug. Do it. Just do it in the debugging dataset. If you want to do debugging, have one for it. If you want to do really high-quality debugging, have an entirely separate, very large debugging dataset. But just keep your debugging out of validation and out of testing. And don't have illusions about thinking that you're still validating if you routinely use your validation set for debugging. Now, since we're getting so cautious, I'm sure you've realized that even if all you do is look at the final performance metric, doing a whole lot of it still teaches you way too much about what's in the validation dataset and how to beat it. I mean, a data scientist is a dangerous thing, right? You'll learn all kinds of things very quickly. You get good at this. So yeah, you do erode and pollute your validation data by reusing it. That's not the end of the world. The whole point here is that you've got one more layer of protection, the truly pristine dataset. That's next. You're using this to get towards a viable solution, and yeah, with every round, the seatbelt erodes a little bit. This validation step is part of the training, tuning, validation process for getting solutions that are likely to work. The test step is the question of, do we use them or do we have pens down? So this is something that helps you succeed on your exam, students. You can cheat, you can mess up here, that's fine. There is a final protection for you. This will just make it more likely that instead of leaving your project empty-handed, you end up getting something good. It will erode as you go on, but there is a later protection for you.